the course of Tuesday night. Once it clears, though, we'll see another clear night and clear start to Wednesday, potentially some further mist and fog, but then the next batch of rain arrives from the west this time, so pushing into many western areas of the UK through the morning and then further east later on in the day. But that will pick the temperatures up a little bit, so temperatures will rise through Wednesday and Thursday before they fall again to end the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation. But yours very much built on confidence and sources and facts. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book. But when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous their riposte to any given situation in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, there have been a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare. You see time and again that they feel they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over
Can you envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Should Lee Anderson have been kicked out of the Tory party? Perhaps even more importantly, why are we obsessed today with Islamophobia after the extraordinary and awful intimidation of members of Parliament last week and continuing into the weekend? Have we inverted what the real truth of the situation is? Debanking now spreads to a Battle of Britain charity. Where will it ever end? And who make better workers? People in their 20s or people in their 40s? You might find there are somewhat surprising results. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has now accused Lee Anderson of pouring petrol on the flames of Islamophobia. He was speaking after the Prime Minister described the former Tory Deputy Chairman's remarks as unacceptable, but refusing to say they were Islamophobic. Earlier, Mr Anderson admitted his words had been clumsy when he suggested Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. He said he'd intended to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. Sadiq Khan says Rishi Sunak needs to clearly condemn the remark.
It's been more than 2 days now since the senior Conservative made comments that were clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic, and still no firm condemnation from the leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister. The problem is you have a senior Conservative saying things that are clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. That's leading to an environment where anti-Muslim crime is spiralling, and what they're doing is pouring petrol on the flames of Islamophobia.
Sadiq Khan, but Rishi Sunak says he has taken the appropriate action.
The most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Rishi Sunak. Well, in other news today, the leader of the Scottish National Party in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, says the Speaker of the House has broken his word after he refused an SNP application for an emergency debate on Gaza. It's after the Commons was thrown into turmoil last week when Sir Lindsay Hoyle allowed a Labour amendment to the SNP's motion on the same subject. Mr Flynn described today's decision as outrageous, and the number of MPs demanding a no-confidence vote in the Speaker has now reached 80. The NHS is said to be under severe pressure as junior doctors continue their third day of strike action across England. It's the 10th time doctors have stopped work since March, as their bitter row with the government over pay continues. Dr Robert Lawrenson from the British Medical Association says the government's happy for the strikes to proceed. Rishi Sunak said, though, that his government had delivered record funding for the health service. And lastly, farmers have been outside EU offices in Brussels today, throwing eggs and spraying manure, as well as blocking streets with their tractors, all in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannon as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. For the very latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code that should come up on your screen anytime now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, let's take you live to Florida for Farage.
Well, good evening. I should have been back in London following the CPAC conference last week, but I'm actually in West Palm Beach in Florida, and that's because a friend of mine who lives here, quite a well-known fella,
said
he wanted to have a sit-down and a bit of a meeting with me, so after the show, I'll be going to see him. I'm sure you can guess who that might be. So it's all Lee Anderson. The national debate is all around Lee Anderson and Islamophobia. Let's just remind ourselves what Lee Anderson said, speaking to GB News at the weekend.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Stormer as well. And we've seen the shocking scenes played out in Parliament just a few nights back where Stormer crumbled. He put pressure on the Speaker to alter the rules, if you like, for the nature of the debate and the ultimate voting. And this is a result of weak leadership.
Well, that was Lee Anderson, and he's got in trouble because apparently that is Islamophobia. In fact, according to Sadiq Khan, it's far worse than that. Let's have a look.
It's been more than 2 days now since the senior Conservative made comments that were clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic, and still no firm condemnation from the leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister. The problem is you have a senior Conservative saying things that are clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. That's leading to an environment where anti-Muslim crime is spiralling, and what they're doing is pouring petrol on the flames of Islamophobia.
And it seems to me most of our political class and much of our mainstream media don't want to discuss what happened last week, don't want to discuss the intimidation of members of Parliament, don't want to discuss the scenes that we witnessed in Parliament Square last week. Remember, this is what was put up on Big Ben, on the Elizabeth Tower last week. And you can see it on your screens, from the river to the sea, and we know what that means. It doesn't just mean the eradication of Israel as a country, it means the eradication of the Jewish people that actually live there. And yet, I think we're having the wrong debate. I think this is a deliberate diversion by a political class that do not want to face up or recognise the responsibility they have for what is happening in our country. Shocking scenes. I mean, Lisa Nandy today confirming that she literally has to carry a police alarm in her pocket everywhere she goes. A fight breaking out in Bradford just last night outside a kebab shop because the kebab owner sells Coca-Cola, who apparently are a pro-Israel organisation. And individual threats against members of Parliament getting worse, as evidenced by Mike Freer deciding, the North London MP, that he simply won't stand again at the next election. Let me tell you why this is a diversion, why we're not having a proper debate. So Khan there, you saw, accusing Anderson of being anti-Muslim, Islamophobic, racist. That's the same Mayor of London, the very same Mayor of London, who didn't say a word about what happened in Parliament Square last week, didn't say a word about from the river to the sea being projected onto Big Ben. And I'm not going to say that the way Lee Anderson put his words was necessarily the brightest use of English, but Mr. Khan, if you're worried about racism, if you're worried about discrimination, what about what's being said to Jews in London, the city that you're the mayor of? What about those scenes in Parliament Square last week? I'm waiting to hear you say something. So, folks, let me know, do you think Lee Anderson should have been kicked out? nfarage@gbnews.com. Well, it isn't just in London that shocking things have been happening, because a meeting up in Stoke-on-Trent at the weekend led to the most extraordinary scenes. And joining me is the Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent North, Jonathan Gullis. Jonathan, just tell us very briefly what the event was and what happened.
Well, thank you, Nigel, for having me on. I mean, what happened was it was a fundraiser for our Police and Crime Commissioner, Ben Adams. We had a fundraising event at a local restaurant. A group of, or hate mob, let's be perfectly frank, Nigel, turned up to spew that they were obviously pro-Palestinian protesters. And what shocked me the most of all is CCTV footage showed a police officer appearing to stand by as 4 to 5 men walked past, up the stairs to the private venue room that we were hiring, shouting and screaming, intimidating and harassing people as young as an 11-year-old girl who was the daughter of one of our local councillors, that they were somehow part of a genocide, that they were murderers and child killers, which is completely abhorrent, completely unacceptable. And I'm pleased that it's now seen that at least 4 people as of today have been arrested, as confirmed earlier on the floor of the House by the policing minister. But this type of thing cannot go on. This intimidatory behaviour should not be allowed, and I certainly won't be coward. I think you know me well, Nigel. I certainly won't be standing back down to these type of morons who simply want to push their extremist ideology in our community. In fact, Nigel, one of the individuals who organised this, as of 2015, was promoting that he was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, a now proscribed terrorist organisation. So by the police standing outside the door, imagine what could have potentially happened to those men, women and children inside that venue.
No, I mean, that is truly, truly shocking. But, Jonathan, why are the police, whether it's in Westminster, where nobody has been arrested from saying from the river to the sea, and why are the police in Stoke allowing people to go in and gate crash a private dinner? What do we need to do with our police forces?
Well, first of all, Nigel, I think we're falling into this trap that somehow we've got to police by community consent, but that always means that the mob will always win, because the law-abiding residents and citizens who are doing the right thing, using a private venue in a private function room, somehow had to be cancelled because a few people outside were angry. For me, it's very simple. The police need to actually enforce the law rather than looking for excuses as to why they can't. That means telling people that they're disrupting the public, that obviously they're causing harassment and intimidation, and for those who are being completely irate, actually locking them up in the back of vans. So those those who are yet to get to that level see exactly what it is that's going to happen, rather than, sadly, as we see, take a knee to the extremist mob. The anti-Semitism that's awash in the streets of London and across our country is completely disgusting and abhorrent. And the fact that people are feeling emboldened, particularly after what the Speaker and Sir Keir Starmer cocked up last week, has led to scenes, as we've seen on your screens just now, that in places like Stoke-on-Trent, where you know, Nigel, people voted overwhelmingly to back you and others to take back control of our laws and our borders and expect firm policing to take place so the law-abiding majority can enjoy their lives.
No, absolutely. And final thought, Jonathan, if I may. Lee Anderson, Member of Parliament, not too far away from you in terms of geography, has had the whip removed. You know, his words may have been a little bit clumsy, but should he have had the whip removed?
Look, the Prime Minister, by Lee's own admission, was put in a very difficult situation, as was the Chief Whip, and so therefore I do back the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip in the decision that they made. But I also hope that Lee can come back to the Conservative Party as soon as possible. I think he's a huge asset to our party, someone who's been a very strong voice on key issues over a period of time that I've been shoulder to shoulder with on, particularly both legal and illegal migration. And ultimately, I think is a strong voice for the Red Wall. And I see yourself, Nigel, and others in Reform tempting him to come over, but I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we want him in the Conservative Party, and I hope that we can find a way forward. And I hope, look, at the end of the day, Lee can say sorry, as you say, for being clumsy with his language, but can still stand very firm in the fact that the Police Crime Commissioner of London, who is Sadiq Khan, has allowed TfL tube drivers to shout over the tannoy from the river to the sea. We've had bus drivers refusing to pick up Jewish students. That's all under his watch and under his leadership, and therefore he should be held accountable by the people.
Absolutely. Thank you for reinforcing the point I made earlier. Jonathan Gullis, thank you again for coming on GB News. Well, maybe to get a slightly different perspective, thank you, I'm joined by Imam Sheikh Ramsey to maybe give us a different perspective on all of this. Welcome back on to the programme. I mean, let's face it, there were some pretty awful things happening last week, including the intimidation of elected members of Parliament. I mean, this is just not acceptable, is it?
You have a point, of course, but the important thing is at the moment how we can eradicate this Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is very important, because as of course Sadiq Khan says, you have to remember Mr. Anderson just pointed at the Sadiq Khan and he said you are Islamists or Islamic people controlling you, and this may not be a right thing to say to the person is the mayor of the London, and he's trying to keep the London safe and keep the Londoners happy. It is very, very important we understand this. However, he says you put the petrol in a flame to get it higher. What we need to do, I think, of course. I believe if Mr. Anderson was saying apology, not to me, not to Muslims, only to Sadiq Khan, because he's pointed to Sadiq Khan, not to all Muslims. He did not say all Muslims are, for example, Muslim are terrorists. That means completely Islamophobia. But what he said is pointing to the Sadiq Khan, and Sadiq Khan should himself sort it out to come to the conclusion that it was a kind of element of, I believe the element of Islamophobia was in there. Some people say a lot. If he could choose his word instead of the Islamist, Muslim, all Muslim helping Christian, helping Jew, but when you bring Islamist word, that is got an element of Islamophobia, because people think, oh, what is the Islamist? Is that a kind of jihadist? And suddenly get fear of the Muslim. And if the people fear of each other, there is no integration, there is no cohesion, there is no understanding. Everything fall apart. Therefore, what we need to do, exactly the same. As I said before, the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia should go together.
No, I agree.
It is very important to eradicate
Sheikh Ramsey,
God bless all.
I agree. I think what you've just said there is incredibly sensible. We should treat both of these things as seriously as each other. And thank you for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
And I do hope Sadiq Khan listens. Thank you. I do hope that Sadiq Khan listens to what Sheikh Ramsey's just said, because, you know, he is literally, as Mayor of London, ignoring what's being said and done to the Jewish community, the intimidation of elected politicians, and pointing the finger at Lee Anderson. That is, at best, double standards. Now, a big interview is going to be played tonight from 9 o'clock on GB News by Patrick Christys, and of course he's had a sit down with Lee Anderson. Here to give us a taster of what's to come is Patrick himself.
Yes, well, Nigel, it looks lovely where you are, I must say, but I was trapped in the GB News bunker earlier on with Lee Anderson and our political editor, Christopher Hope. This is the interview that's going to be leading the news agenda tomorrow. There's no doubt about that. You can get a first glimpse of it tonight from 9 p.m. We do have a little taster of it for you now.
If Mayor Khan is not coming out on TV or any media channel and saying this is disgusting what's happening on our streets in London, we should not have these graphics being flashed onto Big Ben. This is shocking, this is terrible, I will clamp down on this. If he's not saying that, then he's lost control. And you can't blame the police for this. He controls the police, that's his job.
It's fair to say, Nigel, that Lee Anderson is in no mood to apologise, but we do move the discussion on quite significantly. If I was Rishi Sunak, I would pay very close attention to what Lee Anderson says that he's planning on doing at the next general election. I would also be paying very close attention to some of the comments that Lee Anderson reveals he's received from other MPs. I did also ask Lee about whether or not he feels as though his comments have distracted from the very real conversation that needs to be had about Islamism and not simply Islamophobia. He was pressed at times, especially by our chief political editor, Christopher Hope. There's a heck of a lot to go at tonight. It's a long-form interview split over 2 parts. Make sure that you tune in from 9 p.m.
We certainly will, Patrick. Thank you very much indeed. After the break, well, the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has written a newspaper article saying we're going to start deporting foreign criminals. But haven't we been hearing that from Conservative ministers pretty much every year since 2010? Are those statements even worth a row of beans?
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christys Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become, I live there, it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place, and to walk away from that is really it's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had 2 run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online is a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, one or two of your thoughts coming in. Caroline says, no, I don't think Lee should have been reprimanded for telling the truth. And Terry says, Lee Anderson has echoed the thoughts of millions of us, and time for one more. Gareth says, Khan has found a way in defending his inept, totally useless running of London by calling Lee Anderson a racist. I think there is clearly, in my view, a lot of truth in that. Now, an article overnight from Alex Chalk. He's the Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary, and he says that low-level foreign offenders should be given conditional cautions under which they'll be expelled and returned, banned from coming back to the country. He's also trying to build on the agreements with Albania last year, reaching out to Poland and Romania to get rid of more serious criminals. But I've got a slight problem with this, because if you look at your screens now, you'll see these promises have been made virtually every single year since the Conservatives got elected in 2010. Year after year after year, foreign criminals to be deported. The Tory party tough on law and order. Don't make me laugh. Well, I'm joined by Jerry Hayes, criminal barrister at Goldsmith Chambers and, of course, a former Conservative Member of Parliament himself. And Jerry, you know, when I look at all of this, fine, it all reads great, but nothing ever seems to happen. And the real problem here, of course, is that under the Human Rights Act, which incorporates the ECHR, all of these deportations can be individually challenged, and that's why nothing much ever really happens.
No, not really. The fact of the matter is, there are too many people in prison. There are too many people in prison because they've got drug problems, alcohol problems. Get those people out. Let's keep the real villains there.
Well, I understand that, Jerry, but if somebody, who comes from another country has a drug problem, but because of that has used it to commit, serious assaults, violent assaults against people, I mean, surely we should have the right, as a sovereign state, to get rid of him.
Well, we do. We do. We can send them back. Why we haven't done this years ago is a complete and utter mystery to me. Never mind, just send them back. All those people who've committed serious sexual offences, serious crimes against people's bodies, yeah, send them back. We can do that.
Well, if we can do that, why don't we do that? And how is it that in so many of these cases, they go to lawyers, who put in rights to a family life or whatever it may be that they've established since they've been in this country? How, Jerry, what I'm saying to you is, I agree with you in what you say, but it doesn't happen because of the legal challenges.
No, I'm not so sure about this. The lefty lawyers, I just don't get that. I don't do immigration law. I just do crime and things like that. But when you go back to the basics, there are people out there who should not be in British prisons. They should be sent back to their countries of origin. Why should we have to pay for them?
So why, Jerry, final thought on this, yes, fine, I agree with you, absolutely, I'm sure many of our viewers agree with you as well.
Yeah.
How is it in year 14 of a Conservative government that it's not being done?
Well, there's the problem. And there's the problem for you, Nigel Farage. Are you going to stand for Parliament and be the next Tory leader?
Well, I tell you what, Jerry, whatever I was to do or not to do in future, getting rid of the Human Rights Act would be one of the first things I did.
Oh, no,
Jerry Hayes,
no,
criminal barrister, thank you.
Bad. Thank you.
Well, a lawyer would say that. A lawyer would say that. OK. Thank you, Jerry.
Cheers,
well,
mate. Nice
I have
to
to say,
see.
folks, I thought... Thank you. I thought the chances of Jerry and I agreeing were somewhat limited, and sure enough they were, although done in quite a friendly and jovial way. Now, a report coming out tomorrow from the Henry Jackson Society suggesting quite strongly that the policies we've already seen from Labour on immigration, on EU returns policies, etc., could put immigration coming into Britain up by about 250,000 a year. Well, someone who's written about this and got a preview of the Henry Jackson work is Professor Azim Ibrahim, OBE. Explain, please, to our viewers, what is it about Starmer's policies that could lead to this very big increase in legal immigration?
Well, Nigel, as you're aware, the immigration is going to be a major election issue this year, along with the NHS and cost of living crisis. And we compiled this report specifically to look at one of these major issues. We did a very deep analysis of Starmer, what he stands for, and what his immigration policy will actually result in. And we are now in a situation in which we are entering the age of migration. Immigration is only going to increase, and policymakers throughout the West have not really got a good grasp of this. And the conclusion we've come to in this report is that under Starmer, immigration is bound to increase quite dramatically into the UK, simply because his flagship policies are just not workable. For example, his policy of smashing the gangs, the trafficking gangs, is just completely unrealistic, along with this idea that he'll come to some sort of agreement on a quota system with the EU to return illegal immigrants. And neither of these on examination with experts have been shown to be workable in any shape or form.
No, and the other thing, of course, that could happen, I suppose, is that people coming in as care workers, have just been told that they can't bring independence with them. But Labour could, conceivably, soften on that one too, couldn't they?
Yeah, well, that is part of the policy that Labour is looking at, as will more than likely will be softened on that approach. But I think the biggest concern to the British people is not those people that are coming legitimately and coming as workers. The biggest concern is those that are coming by illegally by boat who are entering the country. And I think that is the biggest issue. And the idea that Starmer is going to break up these gangs is just fanciful. And I can give you a very good analogy of this, Nigel. The United States has spent over $1 trillion in the war on drugs, one of the wealthiest, the most powerful countries in the world. And since that time, drug supply into the United States has only increased. And this is simply because of the demand, because there's such a huge demand and it's so lucrative. And carrying people, these smuggling gangs, is exponentially actually more lucrative than carrying any cargo. Any cargo that sees drugs or anything else is, seized and destroyed. With people, they're simply returned, and they just keep trying and trying again. And we are now in a situation in which populations in the developing world are going to increase quite dramatically. And those people, when their basic needs are not met, they'll simply move. This is now the beginning of the age of migration. And no country has been able to figure out a very strong policy in order to deter this. This is why I believe that the Rwanda policy is the only one that's actually going to work. It is the most humane policy, and it's going to be the most effective one.
Well, yes, apart from our old friend, the Human Rights Act, final thought, Azim, from you. The Labour Party have now hit back and said that this report is garbage, full of falsehoods and fanciful figures.
Well, that was expected from the Labour Party, but the fact is I'm actually doing the Labour Party a huge favour by pointing out the holes, because I want to see a robust immigration policy, a humane immigration policy that targets genuine asylum seekers from the source, not economic migrants, most of whom are young men who have given people smugglers between 5,000 to 15,000 euros. And to be quite frank, are very robust individuals. Yeah. You put them in any environment, those people will survive. You can take them to Rwanda, you can take them elsewhere. Those people will do quite well out of it. It is those that are genuine asylum seekers, are victims of genocide, victims of massacres. Those are the ones that we have to target, and those are the ones that we should aim our immigration policy to.
Yeah. Well, a policy that the great British public could see as being fair and reasonable. Ibrahim, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, the row over debanking just simply never ever goes away. In a moment, I'll tell you what's happened to the charity that runs the Battle of Britain Memorial.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basic-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this
Yes?
training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah.
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Right on top of the White Cliffs of Dover, between Folkestone and Dover, there's a little village called Capel-le-Fern, and there you'll find, right on top of the cliff, a memorial to the pilots that took part in the Battle of Britain. 3,000 young men, mostly from this country, but many came from Poland, the Czech Republic, Australia, Canada, even a few from America. And of course, it was the efforts of those men in Spitfires and Hurricanes that stopped a certain Nazi invasion. And it is a beautiful memorial. I visited it several times. Well, can you believe that even this is now facing debanking? And the honorary secretary is Group Captain Tootle, who joins me now down the line. Patrick, how on earth has your charity, remembering this vitally important piece of history, how on earth have you found yourselves being debanked?
Well, I can't understand it. I mean, the battle's been going on for 2 years. They wrote me a letter and said, oh, you're not the right entity, you've got to go from one account to another account. So I said, I don't understand this entity, which is according to the Section 27 of the Laundry Money Act. I don't think we do a lot of money laundering in the Battle of Britain. But what annoyed me was, I said, we are a legal entity. You go onto the Charity Commission website, and there we are still there. Because when we changed to a CIO, a charitable incorporated organisation, we kept the old charity number going, because from 2000 and up to 2017, we're probably still receiving some legacies. So it appeared in wills that it was a Battle Britain Memorial Trust, not the trust with CIO on the end. So I kept saying to them, what is wrong with our entity? Anyway, I got halfway through it last year, and they said, don't worry about it, we can give you the same account number, same sort code number, and you won't have to tell your people to stop their standing orders or change them. And then finally I get something at the end of October that said, we've closed your account. That was from a different branch. So we're sitting there with, beginning of the year, all our orders come in. It's about £8,000, and it's a good cash flow in the fallow years in January, visiting the memorial. So I had to call a couple of staff members in. We wrote all these people for costing us 200 quid and said, this is the problem, but I understand Barclays are fixing it. I then got told at the end of January, no, we can't transfer or move the banker's order to a new account or anything like that. So that's it. And then I got a final call in.
It's unbelievable.
It is. I mean,
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, and also, I mean, it seems that the money laundering, terrorist finance, and transfer of funds regulations of 2017 are what's caught you out. Surely the bank could show you some flexibility, but what are you going to do next? You're thousands of pounds out. What is your next move?
Well, at the moment, I'm actually, this evening before I came on, I've been mailing out to the 285 people with their magazine. We have an annual magazine, giving them a new standing order for the CIO bank account and getting on the way. It's wasting my time when I've got to do other things to keep the trust up and running.
Yeah.
I've closed the account they kindly gave me.
Thank you. Yeah.
Please give me the 9,000.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Sorry?
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on and giving this to us as an exclusive story. And in return, we're going to put on our website your details so that people can give money to the Battle of Britain Trust. It's on the screen now for those of you at home. If you want to help this, and it really is a magnificent memorial to an extraordinary piece of human history, and it's led and run by people like Patrick. Right, moving on. Farmers are not about to stop their protests. In fact, you could argue that today in Brussels, those protests have actually become even bigger, possibly a little touch more violent. And what are they complaining about? They're complaining about cheap foreign imports. They're complaining about supermarket pricing. But they're also complaining about net zero policies, whether that's on carbon emissions, methane emissions, use of nitrates. Farmers, particularly small farmers, feel they are being put under unbelievable levels of red tape, and that it's too costly and it's untenable. And the truth of it is that the European Commission and the whole net zero movement want there to be fewer cows. They want us to have vegan style diets, and that is going to put many of these people out of work. What is interesting is this. Ever since the formation of the Common Agricultural Policy, farmers all over Europe have received their subsidies knowing that it's come from the European institutions, knowing that it's come from the European Commission. And in line with that, a lot of farmers across the continent have been pro-EU. Believe you me, they're becoming far less pro-EU, and that is all part of what is going to build up to be, I think, an extraordinary European elections which take place across Europe, across the European Union, between the 6th and 9th of June this year. Now, a fascinating story that appeared in the Mail on Sunday yesterday. It's running in the Mail today, and it's all to do with Angela Rayner. And the story very simply is that she buys a property 15 years ago as part of the buy-to-let schemes, or right-to-buy schemes, sorry, and she gets a 25% discount on the house. She then, a few years later, gets married, has a couple of kids, and they're registered to the address of Mr. Rayner. The kids are registered to the address of Mr. Rayner. But Angela Rayner goes on saying that she still lives at her original address in Stockport Vicarage Road, as opposed to the new address of Lowndes Road. Why is that a problem? Well, it's for two reasons, really. One, when it comes to registering with the Electoral Commission, you have to give your primary residence, and it seems to us, and particularly, neighbours have confirmed that she wasn't there after she got married. And secondly, because she then sold the house. A few weeks before coming, a Labour MP, and thus it's fair of me to ask a question. Has she evaded paying about 48,000 quid's worth of capital gains tax? Because if you sell a house other than your primary one at a profit, under law, you have to pay capital gains tax. Not to do so, and in fact even to register falsely your primary residence as a voting residence, if that's not where you live, that is also punishable. She's got some big questions to answer, and may I suggest, I think the Labour Party have some fairly big, questions to answer very, very soon. Rayner denies wrongdoing, but just looking at these facts as they've been presented, if they're right, I would say there are two very, very big questions here. In a moment, we'll have a look. Who make the better workers? People in their 20s or people in their 40s? I have to say the conclusions, I think, are pretty shocking.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, it's the row threatening to tear the Tories apart following these comments by Lee Anderson.
These Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan.
Sacked by his party, criticised by many.
What Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable. These comments from a senior Conservative are Islamophobic, are anti-Muslim and are racist.
Now, Lee Anderson speaks out.
I think the party could have given me a little bit more backing. Who has got control of Parliament Square? Is it the extremists or is it Mayor Khan? I admit some of my speech was a little bit clumsy at times.
Tonight, Lee Anderson speaks exclusively to GB News on Patrick Christie's Tonight from 9 p.m. Be there.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in the Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A report by the Resolution Foundation has found this. People in their early 20s are more likely to be not working through ill health than those in their early 40s. Surely this can't be possible. But it is. 1 in 20 young people are economically inactive due to ill health, we learn. And some of these numbers, I think, are pretty disturbing. Survey done between 2021 and 22 found, wait for this, that 34% of young people aged 18 to 24 reported symptoms of a mental disorder, such as anxiety, depression, or being bipolar. And more than 500,000 youngsters during that year were put on prescribed antidepressants. And of course, we know once people go on those, often they stay on them for years and years to come. Now look, I understand that successive lockdowns that we had from our government have done a lot of harm to the mental balance and well-being of all ages of the population. It was, in the end, for the mind, a very, very damaging exercise. But I can't help feeling, and I don't wish to downplay mental health problems, not for one little bit, but I can't help thinking that what we're now describing as being a mental health disorder are just the knocks of life. You know, things go wrong, folks. We lose money. We're involved in a car accident. You know, our grandparents or parents die too young. This is part of life. You have to take the knocks along the way and not say, I'm seriously depressed or anxious as a result of this. I've got a mental health disorder. I think we are massively, massively over-prescribing not just the drugs, but the condition itself. I'm not a doctor, and maybe I'll be shouted down, but that's how I feel about it. Well, I'm joined to debate this by Charlie Mullins, the founder of Pimlico Plumbers, and Amy Ansell, star of The Apprentice. Amy, there's just far too many people not working, convincing themselves they've got mental health problems, when really it's all part of life. That's my view.
Nigel, I appreciate your view and I respect your view. However, suicide is the leading cause of death amongst people between the ages of 15 and 24 in England, and that's a pretty serious and worrying statistic. So I really think we need to take mental health very seriously. I run a small business, and if my staff member says, I feel anxious, I feel depressed, I need to take off, I of course give them a day off, or as long as they need. And the same thing goes if they say I have the flu or I have a cold. I treat mental health issues the same way I treat physical health issues, and I think everyone should do that.
Well, look, Amy, I repeat the point, I'm not downplaying those with serious mental health problems, but if someone said to me, you know what, I don't fancy working today, I feel a bit anxious, well, I know what my response would be. Stay there. Charlie, what's going on? Youngsters having increased rates of mental health problems and not wanting to go to work. How do you read this?
Well, look, we all know that what Amy just said is a load of rubbish. The figures are wrong anyhow. Of course they've not got mental health problems. It's a new word for being lazy. You can get away with it. You can ring in, I've got a bad back, or I've got mental health problems, and unfortunately you have to give them the time off. It's a load of rubbish, absolute load of rubbish. In 41 years of running a business, I never had one youngster ring in to say that he can't come to work because of mental health problems. It's a new word for bad back. It's a new word for work shy. It's a new word for I've been out on the booze. That's what it is. Evidently, they're sort of saying is that you can get mental health problems by being on too much social media. Drinking drugs give you mental health problems, but these people, I'm telling you now, 99% of them are lying. Simple as that.
All right, Charlie, you couldn't be clearer. Amy, you've heard what Charlie's had to say. A guy who's been in business for 41 years, employed a huge number of people. He's basically saying there's too many lazy youngsters.
I appreciate that, Charlie, and I think that's actually quite disrespectful of the young people of today. And that's because in 40 years, a lot has changed. There obviously is now so much more interest and attention on social media. There's cyberbullying. There's a lot of negative impacts that social media has on people. It's a very lonely world. So obviously there are new and impactful issues that affect people that are in the workforce. And in 40 years, I appreciate you're lucky not to have had these people complain of mental health issues, but I am more sensitive to the needs of my employees. And if they say they're suffering from a mental health issue like depression or anxiety, I listen to them and I allow them to take the time off if they need to do so. And I think that's respectful of their health. I see mental health, physical health as the same. So you should do the same. And you're lucky that you didn't have to yet. Any employee is worse.
Amy, let me just stop you a minute. You said you're more sensitive to
Amy, let Charlie come back.
I don't think it's a case of being sensitive. It's a case of being, you're either switched on or you're not switched on. And if you want to allow people to come up with silly excuses, then carry on doing what you're doing and you'll go out of business. Of course, if someone's generally got mental health problems, they will come in with a doctor's certificate, and you will know because they've got mental health problems. You don't want them in the workplace in the first place. But let's not run away with that you're right and I'm wrong. I'm telling you now, I've had probably 1,200 apprentices over the years, and not one of them has ever rung in with mental health problems. The reason why is because they want to come to work. They know that I'm not going to pay them if they don't come to work. It's a new excuse. Look, nobody ever rings in and says, I'm lazy, or I've been out on the booze, or, I don't feel coming to work today. They come up with an excuse because they think you're going to pay them. But if you're gullible enough to believe these people, Amy, then you shouldn't be in business.
Oh, thanks. Well, maybe you're lucky that plumbers don't have mental health issues.
Amy, let me ask you, Amy. If your business and you're running it and it's your money is on the verge of going under, you don't want your staff having a day off saying they feel a bit anxious, do you?
Well, I've been very lucky, actually, because if my staff say they have to take off an extra day due to mental health issues, believe it or not, these young 20-somethings, they make up the time. I've seen that time and time again. And, I think because I respect them.
All right, well, maybe. Folks, I'm going to have to end it there. Very passionate opinions on both sides of that argument. Thank you. Well, I don't know. You think about it, generations that went before, within the last 100 years, were put in khaki, whether they liked it or not, and sent off to fight wars. But, hey, have we fundamentally changed as human beings over the course of the last 100 years? I don't think so. I just think we're overdiagnosing it. No doubt I'll get a heap of criticism for daring to say that. I'm not underplaying genuine mental health problems one little bit. Now, Barclays Bank have responded to the debanking of the trust down on the White Cliffs of Dover and the Battlebrit Memorial Trust. You can read their response. You can read it quickly now if you want to. If not, it'll be up on the GB News website. Now, coming up in a moment, we have got Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I wonder what Jacob's going to say about Lee Anderson.
Oh, well, at 8 o'clock or just after, I'll be saying exactly what I think about Lee Anderson, what he's been saying, the debate he's ignited, and both sides of it, really. What we have to worry about in terms of the threat from Islamic terrorists, but also that not all phraseology is perfect. So I'll be giving a balanced view, but I'll be coming down ultimately on one side.
Very good, Jacob. We look forward to that. Well, folks, that's enough from me for Florida for the day. I've got to go. I've got a meeting with a friend of mine. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It could be quite a cold and foggy start for some areas tomorrow morning. We'll also see some rain pushing in to the north and west. We have got high pressure dominating for the rest of the day and through the night, but we do also have this northeasterly breeze and cold air. So it will be a cold evening and a cold night, in fact, particularly where we're exposed to stronger winds across the far southeast. But many areas will see a frost developing in inland rural areas. Also, there's a risk of some mist and fog, particularly across central and southeastern areas where we have had quite a lot of rain recently. There'll be a very cold start tomorrow, where really could be down to -3 or 4, but the far northwest frost will be more limited as some wet weather is arriving through the course of the night. That will bring a damp start to the day, particularly for northern Scotland, but that wet weather will push into parts of southern Scotland as well as North Wales, northern England too. We'll see some of that rain through Tuesday afternoon. Further south and east, though, it should stay largely dry, but it will be a bit of a cloudier day compared to today. The rain will sink into the southeast over the course of Tuesday night. Once it clears, though, we'll see another clear night and clear start to Wednesday, potentially some further mist and fog, but then the next batch of rain arrives from the west this time, so pushing into many western areas of the UK through the morning and then further east later on in the day. But that will pick the temperatures up a little bit, so temperatures will rise through Wednesday and Thursday before they fall again to end the week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves